Le féminisme au Tchad, c'est changer les choses à bas bruit, sans protester, de manière clandestine, de manière souterraine. Elle est à venir, la révolution féministe, et elle se fera parce qu'elles sont majoritaires au Tchad et parce que les hommes oublient trop souvent qu'ils viennent des femmes et que donc, un jour ou l'autre, la révolution féministe aura lieu au Tchad, qu'on se le dise. Le patriarcat a encore une longue vie devant lui, mais les femmes commencent à bouger, les jeunes aussi, et je pense qu'un jour ou l'autre, ça prendra fin. Si j'ai un message à leur dire, c'est tout simplement à chaque fois qu'ils parlent, qu'ils s'adressent à une femme ou qu'ils parlent d'une femme, qu'ils se souviennent qu'ils ont une mère.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. So for those of you new to my channel, I don't normally film from a park, but because I'm home for the summer, I have to shoot where I can. And so as part of my Foreign Film Fridays collection, I want to introduce you to filmmakers and movies you would not have otherwise been exposed to. And for this video, we are talking about Mahamat-Saleh Haroun's quiet masterpiece, Lingui, Sacred Bonds, which tells the story of Maria, a 15-year-old girl whose unwanted pregnancy puts her at odds with her country's traditions. The story was inspired by an article Mahamat came across about a woman who threw her newborn baby in the trash. This article triggered a childhood memory when Mahamat found a newborn baby dead in a toilet. And so after reading this article, he sought out other articles and also talked to his brother, who's a healthcare professional, and several other, nurses and doctors. And he was saddened to realize that this tragedy, in the past is an ongoing one in the future. And so the frequency in which these types of stories take place, and more so the inability to acknowledge it, right? These stories are buried, and unless you're looking for them, you would not really come across them. This is what gave Mahamat the desire to start writing the screenplay. Traditionally, in a lot of cultures, women are submissive to men, but Lingui kind of shows how this submission can be weaponized in a lot of ways. The thing I loved about this film is that it puts a face to the issue of abortion, not just one face, but two, that of a mother and her daughter. This is because whenever people talk about issues like immigration or abortion, it's always they, like they should do this, they should leave, they. And so to resolve this issue, Mahamat creates very clear and relatable characters to show you why you can't really generalize people who are sharing a similar experience. And when you generalize people going through a similar experience, you detach yourself from it, right? You kind of lose that humanity. When you have a mother and a daughter, he's showing their daily routines, he's showing their life, and he's also showing how their potential future is disrupted and potentially destroyed by their inability to secure a safe abortion. The issue of how to manage the female body becomes less black and white when you give they a name, right? When you put faces to names, it's a lot harder to formulate an opinion, or at least a strong opinion. So in an interview during the Cannes Film Festival, Mahamat discussed why the feminist revolution is inevitable in Chad. First, women outnumber men in Chad. And second, feminism in Chad is quiet, without protest. A lot of it is going on underground, which is very similar to a lot of heavily patriarchal societies. So this is why the film is called Lingui, right, which translates into sacred bonds. So Lingui is an age-old concept in Chad, which revolves around solidarity and the importance of people helping and learning to care for one another in order to build and strengthen the community. Whether it be family or your next door neighbors, sharing space requires people to act with kindness towards one another. And in this philosophy of life, if you kind of break these sacred bonds, conflicts will arise, not just in life, but in the afterlife. And in an interview, he said, according to this philosophy of Lingui, right, when you die, the first thing God asks you is, okay, how are your neighbors? And if you're unable to sort of answer that question, it's not looking good for you. And I love that idea, right? So it's always important to think of yourself as a whole, right? And in a society that heavily prioritizes individual happiness, it's getting harder every day. So this philosophy of kindness is what enables Maria and her mother to be successful in the end. And also, when you see the growth of their relationship, how they started and how they ended, Muhammad kind of offers, you know, tenderness as a force against violence, right? You don't have to fight fire with fire. Like, there are other methods that are far more effective and can accomplish the same thing. So before I start, I just want to give you an overview of Muhammad's work. He's definitely a filmmaker that you should familiarize yourself with. So I'll give you two movies you can start with. The first is Abuna and the second is Screaming Man. Muhammad was made famous by Abuna, which translates into Our Father. This is the story of two brothers whose lives are altered when they awake one morning to find that their father has totally abandoned them. And A Screaming Man is another film that, it's one of my favorite films. So if you have a chance to watch it, you should. This movie follows Adam Osman, a pool attendant at a local resort, who after losing his job is unable to contribute to the war effort in Chad. And so he has to give up the only thing of value that he has, which is his son. So these two films, The Screaming Man in particular, like Lingui, demonstrates how intricately our freedom is tied to the options we have in front of you. So the more limited your options are, the more desperate you become, right? And the more desperate you become, the more you have to sacrifice to give yourself a fighting chance. And so these are very impressive movies if you can watch them. And the one thing that I'm most impressed by, like, especially once you get into his filmography, is how he's able to solicit such insanely powerful performances. So the hardest thing he said was to cast his films. And a lot of the actors that he casts are not like professional actors, and yet he's getting these, like, you would be fooled. I mean, you're watching these movies and you're like, give this person the Academy Award, because sometimes when you're watching a film, you can tell someone is acting, but not in this case. So the way he's able to solicit these performances from behind the scenes is something that should be studied. So I think his work is also of interest to people who are interested in filmmaking and just trying to, you know, you don't have the budget, but doesn't mean you can't get the same results. So he's really someone to look into. So I've divided my video into several parts. First, I'm going to give you an overview of the story. Second, I want to discuss like why it's important to put a face to a name by talking about this mother-daughter relationship. Next, the sort of myth of submission and protection. And finally, how submission or the appearance of submission can be weaponized and be used as an effective force against violence. The film is set on the outskirts of N'Djamena in Chad. The first thing that struck me about this film is how beautifully shot it was, and this is true for all his movies. And the reason he uses a lot of colors and a lot of, like, you'll notice it right away, it's a striking film. And his point in doing this is to show that despite the tragedies that can kind of befall people in this community, there's still love there. And this is another point emphasized, like, there's a lot of close-up shots, especially between mother and daughter. And again, like, he really, through the way he kind of shoots this movie, especially by always putting mother and daughter together, in some way, it kind of reminds you, like, damn, this is not just an individual struggle, but it's like a collective struggle. So Maria and Amina's journey is literally one from darkness and into light. And the way the film is shot, like, really reflects that. We first meet Amina working tirelessly to remove wire from a used tire. Amina had her daughter Maria out of wedlock, and because of that, she was totally disowned by her family. So Amina has been cut off from her family, and no one in her family knows anything about her or her daughter. They don't even know her name. And unlike Maria, Amina's child was born out of love. So Amina had Maria with a man that essentially just threw her out. And although she's alone, you get the sense immediately that she's someone who still very much believes in love and is trying her best to support her daughter. When we first meet Maria, she is irritable, she's upset, she wants to seek refuge in the dark, like she doesn't want to be touched by her mother, she doesn't want to be touched by anyone. And Amina tries repeatedly to try and figure out what's wrong with her daughter, and one day she follows her to school, only to realize that she has been expelled because she's pregnant. And according to the principal, this is becoming a thing, like girls are getting pregnant, and to save the school's reputation, they have to kick them out. Maria, unlike her mother, was assaulted, and worse, she was assaulted by the next door neighbor, like a literal neighbor, who had the audacity to court Amina and offer his undying love and protection to her and her daughter. I mean, this guy is a scumbag, and you can kind of guess who the assailant is, like right from the beginning. So scared and hopeless, Maria pleads to her mother for an abortion, making it clear that neither religion nor the law is about to end her life before it begins. Unable to compromise, Maria takes off into the night. And the thing I really enjoyed about how this movie is shot is that we don't skip the struggle. So Maria runs off and we're always focused on Amina, right? Like, you see her searching for her daughter, you see her running through the streets, you see her trying everything she can, and Mohammed takes like a lot of care not to submerge them in complete darkness, right? There's always like a slimmer of hope that things might work out. Amina tries everything, right? She doesn't really know what's going on with her daughter. And it's to the point where she repeatedly looks to her community for help, including this next door neighbor, because that's where you go when you need help. Amina's prayers are answered when Maria fails to drown herself. She is rescued by a group of men whose reaction to her suicide suggests that this is commonplace. So like the principal, you get the sense that a lot of girls have gotten pregnant, and because they're unable to get rid of it, they take their own lives. Because of her assault, Maria is unable to show any affection towards any man, right? She doesn't thank the men who save her, and she doesn't really care for the doctor who agrees to do the procedure in the end. Now I want to talk about this mother-daughter relationship and why it's important to put a face to a name. Most people have more in common than they realize in terms of the bigger picture, right? And it's easy to ask, okay, what would you do in this situation? But when you ask, okay, what would you do if your 15-year-old daughter was in this situation? That's a whole other conversation, right? And so Maria is at odds with her mother because she doesn't want to be anything like her, right? A loose woman whom no one respects. Because Amina bore Maria out of love, it never occurs to her that her daughter might have been assaulted. And so she tries her best to convince her to keep the child and reveal the baby, the father's name, to try and make amends. And despite Amina's ignorance, Maria is comforted by the fact that her mother chose to have her. She made the choice to keep her daughter despite knowing she'd be kicked out of the family. And throughout the film, it's very clear that if Amina wanted to terminate her pregnancy, she could have. But again, she chose not to. And her decision to keep Maria is probably why she loves her so much. The laws against abortion are so strict in Chad and in a lot of other places that, you could actually argue that it would be more culturally appropriate for someone to marry their assailant than to terminate a pregnancy, right? Than to incarcerate the man. That's how strict, these laws are. And it's not just a legal thing, it's like a religious thing too, right? It's just not something you do. So a lot of Maria's pushback is because she can't even articulate what happened to her. It's not until the end of the film Maria is given the right words. So in an interview, Mohammed explains that in Chad, and I think in a lot of other countries, there's no word for rape, right? There's no word for this thing. It's just something happened, and now we have to take care of it, and we have to make sure as few people as possible find out that this happened. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that traditionally, if a man wanted a woman, he could just go get her. There was very little to stop him, especially if you're alone and you have been kicked out of your family. Through no fault of her own, Maria's pregnant. She's a very popular, smart girl, and her efforts to avoid her mother's fate are futile in the end. Amina, unable to comfort her daughter, tries her best to reason with her. And Amina, unlike Maria, is far more submissive. She's one of the few people that attends the mosque every day, and she's very, very she just keeps her head down, right? If a man lectures her, she just nods and agrees with whatever they have to say. And there's one man in particular, the sort of local religious leader, and he's so adamant, he's always lecturing her about how their community and how if there's any problems, she should just tell him and everything will be okay. And it's to the point where the men in her community, there's a scene where this religious leader literally walks into their house. And again, it's a sign of disrespect, right? You have a woman living alone, why should he respect her? And Amina gets scolded by these men and she does nothing. She just looks down and she accepts. Amina's reluctance at the beginning to ask these men for help And then her reaction at the end of the film when she finds out who Maria's assailant is, that it was the next door neighbor who assaulted her, suggests that her submission was probably in part due to her belief that it would keep her safe. So in this case, you know, we think love thy neighbor, but even if you don't love your neighbor, you definitely shouldn't hurt your neighbor. All right, like just be indifferent at that point. The fact that she was betrayed by her literal neighbor, who's also actively deceiving her to try and get her to marry him, you know, she kind of slowly starts to shed all care, right? And she, by the end of the movie, she realizes the only way she's going to save her and her daughter is for her to be herself, right? Like she can't be afraid anymore. And so even before discovering the father of her daughter's baby, there's a scene where, you know, Amina is so stressed, she doesn't know what she's gonna do, and she just dances, right? She has no headscarf, her daughter's cringing, and she's just shedding everything away, right? She doesn't know what the solution is, but deep down, some part of her realizes that whatever they do from here on out, she has to make sure that her submission or the way that she's living her life, you know, can never rub off on her daughter, right? Like maybe she's living in shame, but she'll be damned if her daughter will be living in the same type of shame. Maria's assault starts to unravel this false correlation between submission and protection. Amina lives in a society which kind of blames her for her isolation and any and all sorrows that befall her. So, you know, Amina kind of did it to herself. She cut herself off. She chose not to terminate Maria. And so that's it, you know, her father disowned her and her family was barred from ever speaking to her again. And so that's it. So, okay, let's just say you do everything you're told. Let's just say you are submissive, you are the perfect daughter. Okay, does that mean your children and yourself, you know, does that mean you'll be safe from violence? And the thing I love about this movie is that it shows that violence is often perpetrated by family and friends, right? It's often the people in your community that inflict the most violence on you. It's rarely ever a random stranger. And so the only reason that Amina is able to save Maria in the end is because of her younger sister. So her younger sister, Fanta, approaches her in a desperate plea, ironically, to save her own daughter. And her daughter is about to be circumcised because her husband commands it, right? So unlike Amina, her younger sister, Fanta, did everything she was supposed to do. And yet she cannot convince her husband, please do not circumcise my daughter. And so Fanta is pleading with Amina. She's like, listen, sister, like Lingui girl, like you gotta save me. And Amina's looking at her like, you're gonna cite Lingui right now? Like, you cut me off a long time ago. You need to fend for yourself just like I've been fending for myself. It's really sad to watch because Fanta, having done everything culturally correct, is unable to protect her daughter any more than Amina is able to protect hers. Desperate, Amina agrees. You know, she figures, okay, this might be my last chance to save my daughter. So she's like, okay, Fanta, I will set up a fake circumcision with this doctor. In exchange, like, you gotta help me. Like, I need to raise this money. And so Lingui right back. Women in this film understand that there is no use in reasoning with the men in the community, which is why Amina and Maria do their best to make sure as few men as possible find out that she's pregnant. So they already know, like, they're never gonna understand. Thankfully for Amina, her sister Fanta is able to give her some jewelry that she's able to pawn and raise enough money so her daughter can have the procedure. But even before this, right, like Amina was desperate. She tried everything. She tried selling herself to raise the money. You know, at one point she tried to sell herself to the man who assaulted her daughter. Of course, she didn't know that at the time, but still, like, she was willing to do anything to make sure that, you know, her daughter got this procedure. The procedure was around 1,600 USD, which is around 1 million, you know, in Chad currency. So it's a lot of money. Like, this is not cheap. And so the clinic, that's the thing, the people who are agreeing to help Maria and Amina, they're agreeing to help because they know the end result. It's like, okay, we'll help you because if you don't, like, things could get worse. And when she's at the clinic preparing to get her procedure done, you know, she's in the light, right? So throughout the film, Maria was sitting in the dark. She's in her room. She doesn't want to be seen, but this is the first time you're seeing some optimism and some hope. And sadly for Maria, like, this clinic gets raided before she's able to have the abortion. But just before she leaves, one of the nurses passes her a number to another doctor saying, listen, it ain't over, girl. Like, you can still get this procedure done. There's this wonderful scene where, you know, after this abortion clinic is raided, Maria is running home in the dark and she's literally running for her life. And I actually, like, watching this was quite scary because it seemed like one of the brilliant things about this movie is that there's so much tension, and you wonder, like, is Maria gonna be able to survive before she gets this abortion? You know, is she able to survive this? And again, it's to emphasize, when you don't have options, people have to sacrifice more and more, including their lives, to give themselves this fighting chance. Maria is able to get home just before her neighbor is about to shoot her in the face. And again, there's not much time left and there's not much hope left. So thankfully, in the end, Maria is able to terminate the pregnancy. And even towards the end, like, the doctor that's performing the abortion doesn't want to do it. You know, like, she's scared. She's warning the mother, like, listen, a lot of things can go wrong and have gone wrong. So I need you to, like, do you really want to lose your daughter over this? And she's like, listen, she's going to lose her life regardless. So you need to do this now. So everything goes well. And, you know, this sort of network, this underground network, was able to, you know, get them what they needed in time. Okay, so that takes me to the next chapter, which is, what is community, right? Like, what does it mean to be part of a community in the year 2022? So I feel like traditionally community is always characterized by people who are not part of the community. You know, it's kind of an exclusionary thing. It's like a club. And you see that in Amina's home, right? So the one thing I noticed about Amina is that although it's just her and her daughter, they feel like a family. And in addition to themselves, they house this stray cat and this stray dog. And, you know, having stray dogs and cats is not a good thing, right? Like, most people would kick them out or scream at them, but not Amina. And so she's managed to create this kind of family, or this safe haven for people who have been kind of discarded. And that's the community, right? Like, they're on the outskirts of a city and they have no family, so it's just them. And the film makes a strong point in having the perpetrator as the next door neighbor. So what was the point of having the assailant as the literal next door neighbor? I think it's to show that community, like power, is an illusion, right? So the laws governing abortion are ineffective, right? They're meant to scare people into self-preservation. They're meant to kind of warn people, like, listen, if you help your fellow neighbor, you're putting yourself at risk. You know, you could potentially go to jail, or worse, you could die. You know, the laws governing abortion in a lot of countries are very strict. I mean, this is no joke. And so a lot of the people helping Maria and Amina are risking their lives in hopes of, you know, saving a life. And so same thing with community. Like, it kind of broadens this idea of community, right? Like, you have a whole network of people from different backgrounds, from different walks of life, but they kind of understand, like, listen, I can't say no. And I think a lot of the reason why abortion laws are ineffective is because if someone is in front of you, again, when you put a face to a name, it's a lot more difficult, right? You got a mother and her daughter. I don't see how anybody with any type of humanity can say no, right? Like, you can do your best to convince someone, but if someone wants to get something done, they're going to get it done. So you can either help, or you can watch something sad happen. And again, like, the frequency of these tragedies is one in which the law is almost a joke, right? It's not going to dissuade anyone. It's going to make it harder for people to achieve that end goal, but it's not going to stop it, right? And so that's the situation a lot of these healthcare professionals are in, where it's like, okay, well, if I don't help this person, they're going to go down some other route, and that could end badly. So again, it's all about humanity, and it's all about kind of, you know, you can't make things black and white. After the procedure, Amina's happy. She's like, I saved my daughter. Like, finally, things can go back to normal. And once Maria is able to speak, you know, there's a lot of hope here, right? The doctor writes her a certificate of miscarriage, so she's able to go back to school. And everything seems fine, but, you know, Maria still has this enormous weight on her shoulder, and now she feels safe, right? So she got the abortion. She feels safe. She hasn't been arrested. And she tells the doctor what happened, right? She tells the doctor, like, listen, something really bad happened to me. She's unable to give a name to it, right? She's like, and then the doctor fills it in. She's like, you were raped, like, you were assaulted. And again, that's to emphasize, like, there's no word for this, right? Like, Maria didn't even know what happened to her. She just knew that whatever happened, she didn't want it to happen. And again, it just shows you, like, there's no words for this. So throughout the movie, we see everything, right? Mohammed takes great care in showing us Amina's journey, Maria's journey, but the only scene he doesn't show us is the scene where Maria tells her mother finally, like, what happened to her. And I had to think about this, like, why is it that he doesn't show this scene? Like, why don't we see Maria telling her mother she was assaulted? And I think there's a few reasons for that. So throughout this movie, there's a barrier between Maria and Amina, right? She never fully understands why her daughter wants the procedure. She just assumes it's to, not be shamed in the community. But after she finds out there's a solidarity, they kind of walk out of the clinic together. And I think that's to emphasize that's the only thing that matters, right? They're walking out of here stronger than when they began. And so I'm open to suggestions, like, you guys let me know why he chose not to show that scene. Amina's about to pay her and the doctor says, listen, we are sisters now. I don't make sisters pay. And again, it's to emphasize community, right? Like, community doesn't have to be your next door neighbor, right? It's how you treat your fellow man when they're at their worst, right? Are you able to kind of facilitate something safely, or are you going to throw them in jail? What are you going to do? Once she found out what happened to her daughter Maria, she has a total shift in attitude, right? This submission, this kind of like dormant, like it seemed like she was almost dormant, like she wasn't really alive or awake, is gone away, right? She's like, okay, well, you know what? The only person who could protect my daughter is me. And she goes on a mission. She's like, I need to get this man back. She is filled with anger. She is filled with just rage, and I think the rage that Amina has is in part like, there's nothing worse than being betrayed by a neighbor, right? Like, there's nothing worse because, again, you have these communal bonds and people keep breaking them. This has to be my favorite scene throughout the movie. Like, Amina literally disguises herself in a hoodie and she goes off to like stalk the man who assaulted her daughter. Like, she has a baseball bat in hand and she is ready to fight back. Like, she is not playing games anymore. And her daughter follows her, right? She notices that she's like leaving. Amina manages to like corner this guy and literally beat him up with a baseball bat. And that whole scene, I was like, kill him. I was like, get rid of this man right now. Like, he's just beating her and beating her. And her daughter, like, it was really funny because Maria's watching her the whole time, and then at the end she pulls her away. She's like, all right, I think he's got enough lickings in there, and they try to run home together, right, before anybody notices. The ease in which Amina is able to beat this man down again shows, like, I think was meant to show like how weak power is an illusion, right? Here's a man in her society. Here's someone that you're supposed to look down, and he falls like nothing, right? He just falls to the ground. And again, it's a commentary on like this dismantling of this patriarchal system that puts people in this sort of like desperate situation. So after this incident, Amina makes the decision, like, listen, we have to leave this neighborhood. And her decision to leave the neighborhood again is to show like community, like, we can't hide out anymore, like they're at the outskirts. Amina has done everything she can to stay out of sight and out of mind, and she kind of believed in this shame that she's been put in. But after this, she's like, you know what, we're gonna move, I'm gonna protect you, like, we got this. Which takes me to the last chapter, submission, like weaponizing submission, right? So in a lot of cultures, the gender roles between men and women, they're very, 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 they're entrenched, right? Like, it's not something you can just, uproot, right? What's the solution, right? So Amina manages to literally bash her daughter's assailant in the head, and that, you can't always do that, right? If you're trying to fight the power directly, you will lose because they're more powerful, right? They're stronger, they have more weapons, they have more everything. So then, okay, if I can't fight you directly, if I can't beat your brains in, then what's the solution? Solution is to make it easier for future generations, right? Like, a lot of the changes that needs to happen, they have to happen underground. And it's almost like you're slowly removing the parts until everything kind of falls to pieces. The scene at the end of this fake circumcision. So female circumcision is sadly, something that's common. A lot of women have gone through it. My mother has gone through it, and it's one of the most draconian, unscientific things in the world. And it's proof that culture is man-made. Like, there's no logic to female circumcision besides controlling the female body. And you cannot make a rational argument for this unless you're an insane person. Mina agreed to help save her sister's daughter by organizing this fake circumcision. And this circumcision was wonderful, right? Everybody's performing, making it seem real. The father is there throwing money because his daughter is about to become a woman. And it's really interesting because there are certain spaces that traditionally men are not supposed to be in, like giving birth, female circumcisions. Like, there's things that it's assumed that you know, it should be dealt with privately, away from the male gaze. Men just assume because of the threat of consequences, their orders will always be followed, right? It's like, I want my daughter circumcised, get it done. Whether or not she's circumcised, he doesn't know, because it's not appropriate for him to be in that room. And so, you know, once they're finished this fake circumcision, you know, there's this party, your daughter is very brave, and they're just laughing in the car, right? They're like, I can't believe it. And again, like, they're taking a huge risk, because if they're caught, a lot of bad things can happen. But again, it's such a funny, light moment, and it really shows you, like, there are other ways to fight violence, right? It doesn't have to be overt. It doesn't have to be like with a baseball bat. It can be underground. So this fake circumcision was really beautiful, because again, it's one of those things that I don't think any woman would want for her daughter consciously. You know, they kind of justify it by saying it's tradition or it's something that has to get done, but there's no why behind it. And so the fact that Fonte is able to save her daughter, again, it kind of lays the groundwork that later her daughter can maybe help someone else. So it's a beautiful scene. And so the movie ends with illumination. They're back in the light. Maria's back in school. And not only that, Maria and Amina have this connection that like this bond that will never break, right? So at the start of the movie, Maria's looking down on her mother. She doesn't want to be like her. And Amina accepted that, right? Amina's like, okay, I'll get you this abortion. I don't want you to end up like me. But once she realizes why, it's unbreakable, right? And not only that, like, Amina is made stronger because she realizes that this power is an illusion, right? This thing to decide who's part of a community and who's not. And at the end of the movie, you get the sense that they're going to create their own community. And that's an important point to note, right? Like, your family can be anyone, you know, just because you're not stuck where you are physically. You know, there are other people who share your views. There are other people who have the same beliefs as you. It's a beautiful film. He makes some beautiful movies. There's a lot that could be said about this. I mean, it's a masterpiece. I think African film has been greatly undermined. There's a lot of great stuff coming out, and I'm not really sure why that is, but I'm gonna do my part. And so you guys tell me if you like this movie. I really wanna, I'm not sure to do it like, this is just, tell me your thoughts. I'm not sure if I want to do it like, you know, for example, introduce you to a director and then talk about my favorite films point blank, or pick a movie and then talk about it. Like, you guys let me know how you want these structured. But please watch this film. It's a great movie. And yeah, you guys let me know what you think. Until next time.